So global food production and feeding 9 billion people, which we'll be doing in not too many years, hopefully, is global. But food is personal. Food is personal. Think about your own life. My mother was a beautiful woman and a talented artist and a brilliant storyteller. She wasn't much of a cook. I think I knew that early on when I started asking her how to cook eggs. But I didn't really know that because what she put on that plate was love. And that love changed my life, made me who I am, made me want to be a cook, and I've spent my whole life cooking. I opened my first business when I was 23, was a restaurant, and learned quickly that I didn't want to be in that business because that takes guts and a lot of work. Robert St. John is a legend in the restaurant business. He's a legendary chef, a great author, but he's more. He's somebody who took on feeding the people that we were just talking about, who aren't getting enough food right here in Mississippi, who aren't getting enough nutrition right here in Mississippi. And that's a huge job, and it's a huge job of love. So Robert, come tell us about it.
I'm going to be without Mike for a second because it turns out the strange bird noises you were hearing earlier were coming from my lapel mic. So I'm going to, I walk around a lot, and so I'm going to try to put this on, and we'll see if I turn this off. And
You want to just use the handheld?
No, we'll give it a shot. I kind of felt like I was outdoors a minute ago anyway, so it was you know what? I'm just going to stay here. I'm not going to walk around. It'll be better. It'll be safer. So what I wanted to do about 3 minutes ago is just say I yield the balance of my time to Dr. Keenum there. That was very interesting. And Mark's a good friend of mine. You know, they say in show business, you never want to follow kids, an animal act, or a university president. They should add that to it. But I feel a little like Fred Capps. Y'all know who Fred Capps is? Anybody? That's my point. Fred Capps is the act that followed the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. Yeah. Probably had a pretty promising career ahead of him. No one today knows who Fred Capps is. So it's a little bit of a challenge to follow. Mark is a good friend of mine, and I will tell you that I am probably the only person in this room who has seen Mark Keenum in a pair of jeans and a T-shirt. And I will tell you that he knows every word to every Vern Gosdin song there is. Although in that T-shirt and jeans, his hair still looked exactly like it does right now. So, look, I thought about they bounced around a lot of topics when they were talking and inviting me here. We want you to talk about this, we want you to talk about that. One of those topics was the farm to the table movement. And I'm sure everybody probably in this room knows the farm to the table movement. And they said, Robert, you know, we're thinking about getting you to speak on the farm to table movement. And what they didn't know is what I'm about to tell you. In the late 90s, I went to Napa Valley to the Culinary Institute of America, which is in the old Greystone Winery. You may have seen it. We got a couple of California guys in here. It's a beautiful facility. They're training chefs out there. They do a great job. And it's the first time I had heard of the garden to the table movement. And it was a wonderful thing. All the chefs, everybody's in their chef whites and their chef toques. And in the morning, they would give us these wicker baskets. And the CIA, as they call it, it's the other CIA, Culinary Institute of America. CIA has these meticulously manicured gardens out there, just beautiful. They're growing all their own vegetables and herbs, and we would get there in the morning, and all the chefs are in their whites, and you grab these wicker baskets and you wander around the vegetables, and we were picking, you know, heirloom vegetables here and there. It was just this Napa Valley cool morning, you know, how the hills are there and the fog kind of rolls over the hills, looks a little like the Smoky Mountains in the morning. It's just a very romantic thing. Well, I fell in love with this idea. And we were picking vegetables, and we would come back into the CIA kitchens, which are awesome as well. And we would prepare these vegetables we had just picked and serve them. And so I came back fired up because I'm thinking, well, I'm from Mississippi, man. We're all about agriculture. I went to Mississippi State. I know, you know, I majored in communications, but I went to Mississippi State. And so I came back fired up about the Garden to the Table movement. And I told my chefs, I said, man, this is the thing. We're going to be the first ones in Mississippi to be on this deal, this new deal everybody's doing now. Restaurants all over the country, Garden to the Table. We look at that as like, well, of course that's what you do because we kind of grew up that way. But in the 90s, it was a very novel idea in restaurants. And so they said, sure. So I went out on the edge of town and some rural land I have, and I planted a 2-acre garden. So here's the deal. I'd never planted a garden in my life, ever. 2 acres, if you've planted a garden, which not many in here have because nobody really reacted to the 2-acre thing. 2 acres is a large garden. So, man, I had this thing set. It was done up. I had irrigation. I had electric fences. I was planting heirloom vegetables. I had all this stuff. I was fired up. We're going to do the Garden to the Table movement. This is going to be awesome. I planted 4 100-foot rows of squash. Now, that's somebody that's planted squash right there. So, y'all, I had no clue. But I was fired up. You know, it was this new thing. We're going to be the first ones in Mississippi. We're going to get press. It's going to be a thing. This will be a big deal. Garden to the Table movement. And so we're irrigating, we're fertilizing, we're doing. The plants are coming up out of the ground. Everything was going great. I'm giving reports to the guys in the restaurant. And so I'm back and forth every day, making the drive. My first crop to come in was squash. So I went to Walmart. I bought 10 laundry baskets. Went out, picked squash. You know, and I was, oh, this is it, man. I filled up all 10 laundry baskets with squash. Came back to the restaurant and said, look, guys, Garden to the Table movement, man, we got more vegetables coming in. Squash came in first. This is going to be awesome. So they were a little impressed that I brought the squash in. And so here's the deal. I was in the car driving back out to the garden the next day, and I had the thought. Now, I'm a fairly intelligent guy, but I'm not ashamed to admit my thought process on the way back out to the garden that day was, all right, let's say squash came in yesterday. I wonder what's going to come in today. Well, you know what it was. It was more squash. So, I had no idea. I didn't know that it just keeps making. So I came out the next day. It was like this big surprise. I got out in the garden. I said, whoa, it's more squash. So I'm really good at this. So I picked more squash, filled up 10 baskets of squash. Like the next day, I was like, whoa. Took them back to the restaurant. We had no room for 10 more baskets of squash. We put it in the beer cooler. And then we started thinking, you know, what can we do with all this squash? We're going to do stuffed squash, fried squash, squash soup. Squash was vegetable of the day. You know, we're trying to figure out how to make squash ice cream if it's possible. And so I'm driving out to the garden the next day, and I was like, I'm pretty good at this. Well, you know what happened? I walked out there, and you know what it was? More squash. So I picked up more squash. The restaurant wouldn't let me put it anywhere. I gave it to my friends, who were very happy to see me the first day. By the third day, they wouldn't even come to the door when I brought the squash. I would just kind of dump it, ring the doorbell, and run. So that was I became overwhelmed with this 2-acre garden, and other things started coming in. And everything eventually went to seed, and now we source locally, but I'm not the gardener or the leading figure of the Garden to the Table movement in Mississippi. I did not carry that mantle, but I'm all for it. So I won't be speaking today on the Garden to the Table movement, despite the topic that was brought up to me. I'm probably the least likely person to be at this podium that you're going to hear over the next day or two, however long this festival is. I really, really am. And just, I'm going to give you a little background before I get to what Dr. Keenan was talking about. I'm going to take you to that point. So I'm from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I have 6 restaurants, a couple of bars, I've written 12 books, got a TV show, this and that. But I started as a kid who had a lot of energy and really just as I went in my teen years, not a lot of direction. My dad died when I was 6. My mom never remarried. She was a school teacher. She raised my brother and me up on an art teacher's salary. And so I started working at 13, and then I started working full-time with a real job at 15. I was a radio station disc jockey all through high school, 40 hours a week. And came up here to Mississippi State almost 40 years ago. It would have been August of 1979 as a freshman. Majored in communications because I had been working in radio. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew that's what I knew at the time, and so that was my major. Mainly what I did is major in the Crossroads. For those of you who will remember the Crossroads when they were there, which was maybe the worst idea ever, is to make college students drive 20 miles in a car to drink a lot of beer and then drive 20 miles back. But I actually worked, my first job in either a restaurant or a bar was at Lindley's. I also spent a good bit of time at Eccles. And after 2 years, Mississippi State decided they no longer needed my services in Starkville, Mississippi. And I flunked out of school. And it was one of the absolute, other than my father dying, it was the absolute worst thing that had happened to me. It was self-inflicted, obviously. And so I went home, tail tucked between my legs, embarrassed. I had friends who were in school all over the state and all across the South who were succeeding and doing well. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't think I wanted to be in radio. And so I went and I had to get a job. And there were 2 ladies who were opening a delicatessen in Hattiesburg. They had no idea about the restaurant business whatsoever because they hired me as the manager. So, and it's one of those things, y'all, that not from the very first day, but maybe the first hour, something clicked in me. And it wasn't like, this is what I want to do. It's like, this is what I'm supposed to do. I loved it. I felt like it was something about the restaurant business that just clicked with me. And it's the first time in my life that this thing that seemed so tragic at the time, one of these worst things that could have ever happened, turned out to be a blessing. And so I started managing this delicatessen during the day, and I started waiting tables at night in another restaurant. I just couldn't get enough. And so I said, you know what I want to do? I knew at 19 years old, I knew what I wanted to do, and it was I wanted to open a restaurant one day. And so I straightened my life out. Got clean and sober, went back to school, this time at the University of Southern Mississippi because they had a degree in hospitality management. Took 18 and 21 hours working full-time, summer school, the whole thing, got out quickly. And because I was single-minded and focused on opening a restaurant, and that's what I wanted to do. December 27th, 1987, I was 26 years old. I had been through this very long and storied college career. We opened Purple Parrot, which is still open today right there on Hardy Street. This was my first restaurant. We, at the time, I was a front of the house guy, is what we call that. Somebody out on the floors. I had been a waiter through this long college career, and I was going to be the front of the house manager. I hired all my buddies who were servers I had worked with. We hired a chef from the Panhandle of Florida who was a legend. He was a legend for 2 reasons. One, he was a great chef, and everybody loved his food. Number 2, he was like a party animal. I mean, this guy he was a legend down that area. He would start drinking one day, and 3 days later, they'd find him in Panama City or something. So I hired this guy. I had nothing, y'all. I had a negative net worth. I was living rent-free in a 1-bedroom garage apartment behind my grandmother's house, which actually I lived there till I was 30. And so I sold a little piece of land my grandfather had left me for $25,000. That was my stake in starting this restaurant. And I told this guy, whatever you do, you cannot drink. Do not drink. I had stopped drinking 4 years earlier. Still don't drink. I sell it. I'm all for it. It's going to put my kids through Mississippi State. But so I told this guy, whatever you do, you cannot drink. Do not drink. He said, oh, I got this or whatever. So he developed the recipes, took care of the kitchen part. I hired my buddies out front. Opening night, December 27, 1987, went for a soft opening. Those of you in marketing know what a soft opening is. It's where you just open the doors, you don't advertise, and hopefully business will trickle in. Eventually you kind of get your legs under you, and then, well, in 1987 in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, there were really one or two other independent restaurants. That was it. No chains. So we were packed from the minute we opened the doors. Everything went fairly smooth, and about 8 o'clock I started noticing some hitches in our service. Don't get ahead of me now. This guy's smart right here. The sponsor, he knows what's going on. And you know what happened? I walked to the back, and the chef is nowhere to be found. I learned my first business lesson, which is lock the beer cooler. And I went out back, and the chef had drank a case of beer out of the walk-in and a bottle of Dr. Tishner's from across the street at the Shell station. So I fired our chef opening night. So night number 2, you know who was back there, and it was me. And the extent of my cooking experience at that point in time was that I had asked for and received an Easy Bake Oven when I was 6 years old for Christmas. That's it, actually, over there, right there, if you see it. That is my Easy Bake Oven. So my experience at that time, I brought that in case we had college students here today, because no student would know what an Easy Bake Oven is today, but. So here's, again, my dad dying, me flunking out of college, and then firing the chef opening night. My mother had begged me already, do not open a restaurant. You're going to ruin the family name. It's going to be the worst. The family name wasn't that great to start with in the first place. But and so here was, I fired our chef opening night. It seemed like the third worst thing that had ever happened in my life. And it turned out, again, to be a blessing, because what happened is I got back there, and you do what you have to do if you're in business, and I did what I had to do, and I got back there, and I just started working. I taught myself. At the time, we were closed on Sundays. Hattiesburg is an hour and a half north of New Orleans. I had gone down to New Orleans all my life, eating around New Orleans, but this time I was going with different eyes. And my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, she's my wife now, I would drive on Sundays, eat around New Orleans. I would come back and try to replicate those dishes. So I spent the first 4 years, 90 hours a week in the kitchen, working, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I loved, I paid myself $12,000 a year the first 2 years we were open. And the dirty secret there is, had I had the money, I would have paid somebody. I wanted to own my own business so bad, and I loved it so much. So really from there, my life has been, I think something early on clicked in me to be open to opportunities, I think was what it was probably. And sometimes I was open, and sometimes I was kind of brought dragging, kicking and screaming into it. But from there, to give you the condensed version, to bring you to here, I got a call from the local newspaper in the 90s. They asked me to start writing a column for them. I said, no, I don't have time. Too much going on. They called again. No, I don't have time. Called again. They kept pressing. Finally, my marketing director says, you need to do this. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And so I started writing this weekly column, food, humor, the South, this kind of thing. It's pretty bad early on, but in a little while I developed a passion for it. And then the Clarion Ledger called, and then the Sun Herald called, and then the Daily Leader called, and within a couple of years I was in 30-something newspapers every week. I still write the column. Newspaper business is not much around, but I still write it every week, and it became this thing I became passionate about. From there, we have a woman who was a great customer in our restaurants, a lady named Frances Carnes, who ran the Gifted Studies program at Southern Miss for years. It's named for her now. But she was one of these restaurants. She was like everyday customer. And I'm not exaggerating saying, you know, she was 5 days. She was every day. She ate lunch in the restaurant maybe 4 or 5 nights a week. And she's one of these people that are always trying to instigate, oh, you ought to do this, you ought to do this, you ought to do this. And she got on a kick in the late 90s, early 2000s. Robert, you ought to do a cookbook. And I would say, Francis, I don't have time to do a cookbook. I'm doing these restaurants. My daughter was born. You know, now I'm doing this food column. You know, I'm too busy. Next time I'd say, Robert, you ought to do a cookbook. I said, well, I don't have time to do a cookbook. Next time I'd say, Robert, this went on for a month or so. And finally one day, she was seated at table 3 in the Purple Parrot with a gentleman, called me over, said, Robert, sit down. This is so-and-so with this publishing company. Tell him about your cookbook. Well, you know, I was trying to think quickly on my feet. I said, well, if I were to do a cookbook, I would have recipes I developed here at the restaurant over the years. I would have stories about food in the South and growing up in the South, like I do in my column. And I would have watercolors by Wyatt Waters. And the publisher said, well, if you get Wyatt Waters, you got a book deal. The problem is I didn't know Wyatt Waters. What it was, I had his book. He had 2 books out at that point, and one of them was called Painting Home. He's a watercolor artist, one of the most famous in the country, and he had gone all over Mississippi painting different communities. And when he came to Hattiesburg, instead, the 2 most iconic probably structures in Hattiesburg, you would say the administration building at Southern Miss with the dome, you may know that building. And there's another one, maybe the McLeod House downtown. It's an old Victorian home, beautiful home. And that's typically the subjects most watercolors would come and do. Well, when Wyatt came to town, he chose the Beverly Drive-In Theater, which was a great, and the California Sandwich Shop downtown. So when I opened that book, I thought, I get this guy. You know, those would be my choices. And so I just got in my car the next day, and I'm not the guy who would typically go ask the girl out. I wasn't that guy. And I'm not a just cold call kind of, but something about this challenge almost this guy giving me. I just got in my car, drove to the Wyatt Waters Gallery up in Clinton, said I've got an idea for what would be maybe a coffee table cookbook, your watercolors, my recipes and stories. And we talked about that for about 15 minutes. Then we spent the next 4 hours talking about the Beatles, and we just hit it off. And we started working on this book. And about 2 or 3 months into it, the publisher called. And he sent me a copy of, it was this black and white rag paper kind of cookbook. And I was like, oh, he doesn't get it. You know, I'm talking about full color, you know, glossy pages, this and that. And so I said, well, this isn't going to happen. He doesn't get it. So Wyatt said, no, just publish it yourself. Well, I'd never published a book, but I'd never opened a restaurant, and I'd never written a column. So I thought, okay. And so we hired a producer to produce the book. We got the book. And from there, I got a call from the producer. It was about the time to print the book, and he said, how many do you want to print? And I said, well, I remembered back to that very first conversation with the guy at the table, publisher, and he said it a little arrogantly. He said, if we can't sell 7,000 books over the lifetime of a book, then we're not interested in it. So I thought 7,000 must be some number with publishers. So I said, okay. I told the guy on the phone, print 10,000 of those things, and I'll never have to worry about it again. My grandkids will have books in their attic they can sell, you know. And so the book came out right before, at the 1st of November. It sold out before Thanksgiving. The second printing sold out in 3 weeks. Second printing sold out in 3 months. And so this thing just happened. And Wyatt and I now are working on our 5th book. It's my 12th book that'll be out this fall. From that, we have a TV show, and just this whole thing has happened. I say all that to say this, that being open to opportunities is one of the best life lessons I've learned. And you never know how it's going to come or what it's going to be disguised as. But in 2009, I got a phone call from a place called the Edward Street Fellowship Center. We've got, you know, restaurants working, and we do a lot of charitable things, and anytime we can help, we want to help. This place was feeding about 800 families a month as a mission pantry, and they were out of food. I mean, completely out of food. They said, Robert, we've got all our clients coming in Friday. Can you help? We have no food. And I said, sure. So I figured the quickest, best, easiest way to help would be to call my Cisco being the food service distributor, call my Cisco rep, put together an order, have them drop ship it to the agency quickly so they could get food to their people. We did that. They got food, and this thing happened, and they called and thanked me, and, oh, you saved the day, this kind of thing. And I was like, you know, maybe if there were a easier, more effective way to get food to these places, this wouldn't happen as much, and places wouldn't run out of food. And so I came up with this idea based on the premise of what if every business and every home and every restaurant in Mississippi had an extra table where they could feed those in need. But to be honest with you, and I'm just going to be honest with you, down deep I was really skeptical that there was even a hunger problem. And I'm thinking, this is America. You know, I get maybe some third world country in Central America or something, maybe they've got problems. This is America. Certainly there's no problem. And so I kind of went on a tour of my own, and I went back to Edward Street and talked to them. I went to a place called Christian Services, went to Jackson, this place called Stewart that does great work. And I'm going to tell you, it didn't take long to learn that there is a huge problem with hunger, and not in some third world Central American country, in Mississippi. And I learned quickly that there's a big need. And so I went to Cisco and I said, I've got an idea. It's based on this extra table premise. I need you to sell me food at your rock bottom cost, and I need you to deliver it to these agencies. And I'll get the agencies. And they said, we're in. They didn't even hesitate. And so I founded Extra Table on two founding principles. Number one, that 100% of the money we raise, the agencies will never have to raise a dime. We'll raise all the money. We'll purchase food, and we'll send it to the agencies. And the beauty of it is we just took business principles and applied them to a nonprofit, because we tap into Cisco's buying power, so we get it cheaper. We tap into their delivery system. They're the largest in the world. In the most remote town in Montana, you can get a Cisco truck there. And so we founded on the principle that 100% of the money we raise is going to go to purchase food. Nothing's going to go to admin or anything like that. And number two, it's going to be healthy food. Now, here's the other thing. Mississippi is number one in food insecurity. Actually, I think we've dropped, we're 49 now. But we're also number one in obesity. And I had a problem with that too. I'm like, well, somebody's eating something somewhere. How's this happen? I was a little cynical about that. And on that tour, what I learned is that those who are the least well-fed and those that suffer from what the government calls food insecurity, a lot of times are the most obese because they're basically living out of a convenience store. It's a real thing, guys. Counties with no grocery store. And so the cheapest food you can buy are sugary, cheap drinks and snack foods. And there are people in Mississippi today. And so that's where the obesity comes from. So the second founding principle, I said 100% of the money is going to go to purchase food. Number two, it's going to be healthy food. Low-fat proteins, low-sugar fruits, healthy grains, low-sodium vegetables. And that's what we're going to do, because walking around those agencies, you know, most of them live off canned food drives, which are the most ineffective way to feed. They won't tell you that, and they shouldn't, because they need food. But what these people need is canned tuna, and not, I would see stuff like blueberry pie filling people were just trying to get rid of, you know. And so what Mississippi is today, Mark quoted some numbers, but he didn't tell you about Mississippi. He's talking about global food hunger, and I'm gonna bring it down a little more local. 670,000 Mississippians suffer from food insecurity. 250,000 of those are kids, school kids who have a school breakfast and a school lunch and don't eat again until the next day. It's a real thing. 125,000 are seniors who right now are trying to figure out, can I pay the light bill or can I go to the grocery store? It is a real thing. And so what Extra Table does, we started with one agency, Edward Street Fellowship Center. We raise money in communities. We spend that money. We buy wholesale in bulk. So if Andrew wanted to go to the Kroger and fill up a shopping cart for $500, we can take that same $500 and fill up 2 shopping carts, and we deliver it. Because these agencies are run on volunteer labor. You know, it's a lot of seniors volunteering, and they're opening 50-pound bags of rice and 50-pound bags of beans and putting them in Ziplocs. We ship 1-pound bags of rice, 1-pound bags of beans, all healthy food too. And so it became this thing, and today we are in our 10th year. We're having a 10th year anniversary. We are now in 39 agencies across the state of Mississippi. We're shipping about 14 tons of healthy food every month. We are run out of a barred corner of my office by one person, and that one person is here, and I want to introduce her today. This is Martha Allen. Will you stand up, Martha? Y'all give her a big round of applause. Martha runs a statewide charity feeding that many people with herself and one intern. And I'm going to tell you, so what we do, how we're able to get food to these agencies is that we have separate fundraisers over here to take care of the minimal administration costs that we have. But we run that thing on a shoestring. I used to say we count paper clips, and the people in the office said, no, they count your paper clips. So it's this thing. It's one of those things that I talk about a one thing a lot of times. I don't know, how's my time? Am I up? Okay, perfect. So I talk about this one thing a lot of times. And what it is, I have a belief that if every person did one thing, just one thing, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be Extra Table. It doesn't have to be Mark serving on international UN boards or councils. Let me tell you about Hattiesburg. Hattiesburg, Mississippi is a guy named Larry Doliak. He runs a pretty big electrical contracting business, but he loves Little League baseball, man. And his thing was Little League baseball. And he plugged in and worked at it. I'm talking about for 30 or 40 years, and that was his thing. And if you go to Hattiesburg, Mississippi today and see the Little League baseball parks there, they are world class. And what you see is Larry Doliak Field. He didn't do it for the recognition. He did it because that was his one thing. There's a lady named Sarah Newton. Her career is as an architect from Mississippi State, by the way. And she's a very successful architect, but she started a music concert series called Live at 5 in Hattiesburg. That's her one thing. And it became a thing. It started out with just, at 5 o'clock on a Friday in April, we're going to have a free concert in the park for everybody in Hattiesburg. And now, every Friday in April and every Friday in October, there's a free concert for everybody in Hattiesburg. It's just a great community thing. That was her one thing. Becky Montague, you know about these little libraries? Do y'all have them here in Starkville? You know, little libraries where it almost looks like a mailbox. It's glass, and they're all decorated. They're differently, and they get creative, and they're all over town. We have a lady in Hattiesburg, Becky Montague, and that was her thing. That was her one thing. So there's a lot of one things out there. It's one person and one thing. And if you think about, what if Hattiesburg, Mississippi, or Starkville, Mississippi, of 25,000 people, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, what if 25,000 people here were doing just one thing? And what would that look like in a community? So I never was looking for one thing. I was a pretty selfish guy most of my life. But this Extra Table opportunity happened, and it was another thing like when I got into the restaurant business. It's not, this is what I wanted. It's like, this is what I'm supposed to do, almost to a point. This is going to sound a little corny, but it's 100% how I feel. It's like, this is what I was born to do. It's like almost everything in my life that led up to that point got me to this, which is what I'm supposed to do. And so Extra Table's here today. We're in our 10th anniversary. We're feeding a lot of people. It's growing by leaps and bounds. Martha came on a year ago, and it's amazing what we've done. And so I've been blessed, even though I wasn't looking for a one thing, I've been blessed to find my one thing. And I'm sure a lot of you have your one thing. And if you haven't found it yet, it's not too late, I know. But so the thing is, after 4 decades in the restaurant business, I started thinking at the end of the day, do I want to be the guy that fed people filet mignon, or do I want to be the guy that fed people canned tuna? And it's the easiest question I'll ever answer myself, because the canned tuna wins out every time. And so, again, if you would have told me 40 years ago when I was a freshman here at Mississippi State in communications, living in Hightower Dormitory, partying way too much, 40 years from now in that old physical plant building, you're going to be up here telling people about people who are hungry and feeding those people in the state of Mississippi, whether it's through a restaurant or whether it's through a nonprofit. I would have told you that that's just not me. And so that's why it's so much more important to be open to opportunities, because you never know when they're there. And for me to be here, and I'm still a huge Mississippi State fan, I really, really am. My degree's from Southern Miss, but my heart's up here in a lot of ways. And my daughter's a senior here, my son will be a freshman here, and we're here a lot. And I want to thank everyone who's a part of this university for what you do, not only for the university, but for the city of Starkville and the state of Mississippi. And I'm grateful for that, and I'm really grateful that you asked me here today. Thanks for having me, and y'all have a great conference for the rest of the time. Thank you.
Hey, Robert, hold on a sec. I'll meet you around the front here.
I know how to ring it. Oh, it's a wooden one, too.
Yeah. Ask Martha to step forward and just say a few words about Extra Table.
Like Robert said, my name is Martha Allen, and this was home for a very long time for me. There are a lot of familiar faces in the room, and I'm so excited to be back. I told Robert it was tears of joy that started as I came down those last hills in Tupelo yesterday about 2:45, and the tears of joy didn't stop till I was about a glass of wine in last night. So it's wonderful, wonderful to be home. This is such an incredible place, and known Dr. Ford and had the opportunity to work with his wonderful interns for many years. This opportunity to work with Robert came actually a year ago last Friday, and I packed my bags and headed to Hattiesburg. Food is hope, and food is a human right that someone should not be without. And we shouldn't have our seniors choosing between their next medication or keeping their lights on, or children not knowing and living in fear of where their next meal comes from. And with your support and with your help, we are able to feed people. And like Robert said, one basket at the grocery store that you purchase is $2. Your $5 is almost $12 with us. When you give us, you don't have to give us $5,000 or $150. Like your $5, your $10 a month matters to Extra Table. So I really challenge you. I challenge you in your office environment, in your Sunday school class. Please let me know. I'd love to come speak. Log on to our website. It's our 10th anniversary. We'd love your support. Every dollar that you donate to food, whether it's a food pantry on the Gulf Coast or here, makes a huge difference and is never spent buying pencils for my office or my salary. There's a completely separate group that does that. So when 100% of your donation is going to feed our hungry neighbors here in Mississippi, and 100% of it's going to be healthy, we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone there. So we'd love your support at Extra Table. Please contact me, extratable.org, and we'll be out front. I think Robert's got a couple books, and I'd love to talk to you about joining our campaign to feed our hungry neighbors. So thanks. Thanks, Dr. Ford.